with the dollar becoming the global reserve currency, that would make the dollar a stronger currency. Is that what led to the kind of collapse of manufacturing in the US?
It certainly played a big role. I mean, to some extent, we've seen it worldwide, where obviously automation's been a big role. Anything that's kind of low cost and low margin, a lot of countries exported that type of stuff. For example, textile manufacturing. So the dollar's not to blame for every aspect of it. But if you look at the United States, it happened a lot more rapidly and thoroughly than many of our developed peers. And so, for example, in addition to exporting our cheap manufacturing, we also export a lot of our advanced manufacturing. Whereas you see countries like Germany or Japan maintained a lot of their advanced manufacturing. And this comes down to, when every country needs dollars, as you point out, it basically strengthens the dollar. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean it stays strong all the time. We've actually had the dollar deteriorate against many other currencies because we have these underlying imbalances continuing to grow. But it means that any given one time, if you have the whole world demands dollars, basically it's just all this extra demand. And so we end up exporting dollars to essentially meet that demand. There's an artificial amount of extra demand for the dollar. And so most countries, when their currency gets too overvalued, they start to get a trade imbalance. They get a trade deficit, and that eventually normalizes. Eventually, their exports become uncompetitive, and they have a recession, and then the markets eventually kind of sort that out. Same thing if their currency gets too weak, unless there's excessive persistent manipulation, eventually it kind of goes back to that median point. But the United States, because of the system we constructed, has been able to maintain a multi-decade, very large trade deficit longer than pretty much any other country out there. And so we've basically had the imbalances build up more and more without allowing that kind of natural error correction or mean reversion to occur. And that's, again, it's by design. And so the major beneficiaries of the system are those close to the money printer. So if you work in DC, not just the politicians, but the lobbyists and all the ways to influence DC, the infrastructure around DC essentially, as well as Wall Street, as well as very, very high margin businesses, like, for example, information technology, healthcare, right? A lot of that, if you work in those types of fields, you did very, very well. If you work in fields that make things, right? So you manufacture, or if you work in jobs that are associated with that. So, for example, there are, if you were working at a restaurant that served, upstate New York or somewhere else, somewhere in the Midwest, for example, a lot of that was deindustrialized. And so it wasn't just manufacturing jobs. It was all sorts of areas in the region. So you can kind of almost characterize it by industry as well as by region. Essentially, the coast benefited more or less at the cost of the center of the country. And so those imbalances have grown over time, and it can be very hard to pinpoint for a lot of people, where those causes are. They know that there's wealth concentration, but they don't know why. And just, so again, some of this is global. But for example, if you look at wealth concentration in the United States compared to many other developed countries, the United States is near the top of the list in terms of wealth concentration, in part because we've had these more deliberate policies that kind of gutted our working class and middle class type of jobs at the expense of kind of amplifying some of those really high-end jobs, or the ones that kind of control the capital.
What would the impact of this be if the petrodollar was to collapse? What would the impact be for the US?
Well, I mean, I think there'd be multiple issues. So one, there's two layers of it. There's medium exchange and store value. So if they start to do medium exchange outside of the dollar and the SWIFT system, right, then that reduces the United States' sanctionability and essentially hegemon status.
Well, so the Russia-India deal was in response to sanctions to certain Russians as well.
Yes, but one thing is so a lot of this has been building for a while. So, for example, there was a Bloomberg article back in 2019 that I highlighted in my 2020 petrodollar article that showed that Russia and India have been already going along that path. They basically agreed to increase their trade and to start pricing it outside of dollars. And so we actually already saw that building up ahead of time. And now, of course, there are certain catalysts like we're seeing today that can accelerate that. So it's not like it just went from 0 to 100 this month. This has been building and growing for a while, and it's already happening along the spectrum. And so Russia's kind of at the heart of the de-dollarization in the sense that, they're a large oil provider, so that impacts the petrodollar system. And they have massive trade with Europe, China, India, and other countries. And so because they've been aggressively de-dollarizing, the fact that these other peers go along with it, many of them either neutrally or that they also have an interest in doing it as well, like China, for example, they de-dollarize. Now, there's two layers of it. So one is the medium exchange, how they actually make the payments, because that can mean that the U.S. is unable to block them from trading. if they trade within a dollar-based system, the United States can block, two countries from trading that have nothing to do with the United States, which is kind of crazy if you think about it.
How do they block? Is it the specific transactions they can block? Because I don't actually understand how these dollar transfers happen.
So they cut them off from the SWIFT system.
Right.
And there are people that can go down that rabbit hole way better than I can. But essentially, if you're in the dollar-based system and you're using these interbank transfers, the United States has kind of veto power over that essentially. And so basically they can sever them from the system. And that happens in extreme cases, like with Iran, for example. They get completely cut off. Other times it's more kind of a, sanctioned without the nuclear option of just completely cutting them out of it. And so that's the medium of exchange aspect. And then the other question is where they hold their foreign exchange reserves. Do they hold treasuries, for example, or do they hold other things? And so Russia, for example, has decided not to really hold treasuries anymore and to hold mostly euro-denominated assets as well as gold and some other types of assets. And so they can go, generally if you start transacting in other currencies, the natural result is that you're going to have your reserves change as well. But they're in theory, they're kind of two separate decisions that can be store of value and medium of exchange.
So do you think that's why Russia has been increasing its holdings of gold?
I do. I mean, basically, I think they've been trying for a long time to make themselves more sanction resistant or you can never really make yourself completely sanction immune in this world, given how dollarized everything is. But there are some countries that if they're cut off from the SWIFT system, they're overnight, they're in trouble. Whereas if you have enough of your trade denominated outside of dollars and you have a lot of reserves, and Russia has quite a bit of reserves relative to the size of their GDP, then they're very strong against that. So the more self-sufficient they are, and then the more outside of the dollar system they already are, the better they are. So Russia is actually arguably one of the strongest countries when it comes to being able to withstand heavy sanctions.
And so how is Iran able to trade? And just to add to that, a friend of mine went to Iran once and told me they had no idea that they wouldn't have access to any of the banking system there. Their Visa or MasterCard wouldn't work. And it was a bit of a problem getting into the country because they had the dollars they had with them, which wasn't a lot, but they had nothing else.
Well, yeah, I mean, you don't think about it until you are without it, right? Things that we take for granted, that they can be shut off like a switch if basically that country's outside of the global order, either for it could be that country's crazy or that country's doing something that powers don't like. So there's a range of reasons. And when you look at Iran specifically, there's been a couple different payment options. I mean, Europe tried, I believe it's called Instex, where they wanted to do euro-denominated payment rails. And that didn't seem like it really went anywhere. I was kind of surprised by that. They've been one of the early dabblers in Bitcoin, right? Because you have that permissionless payment aspect. And that's that comes with any technology. Anytime there's a new technology, generally some of the more unsavory characters are the ones that gravitate towards it first. And I like to use the example of beepers, pagers. When they came out,
drug dealers.
Yeah, drug dealers loved it. And of course, you could make the argument like, oh, look at these pagers and beepers, it's just enabling drug dealers. When of course there are all sorts of professions and reasons for people that want to use them. But naturally, criminals, and there's different types of criminals, right? There's objectively bad criminals like murderers and human traffickers and things like that. And then there's criminals that, if there's some countries where protesting the government is a crime and you're a criminal now, right?
A few years ago here, buying weed would have been a crime, and people are still in jail for selling weed, yet it's legal in large parts of the country.
Exactly. There's a whole spectrum. There's ones that are obviously wrong. There are ones that, morals change over time. And then there are other ones where, like, literally they'd be considered heroes in other countries or patriots, whatever. But in their country, they're considered criminals. And so naturally, people that have those specific problems, for better or worse, that, on the good side, you could be cypherpunks or human rights activists. On the other side, maybe you are criminals or kind of a violent rogue state, whatever the case may be. Those types of entities are more likely to gravitate to this because that's generally what they need. Payment is not something that comes easy to some of those groups.
Before we continue, help us clicking that YouTube like button and subscribe now to our channel. This shows the algorithm that you valued this information. And it helps us spread that message. Sharing is caring. And now, let's continue.
Do you want to know one thing about crypto? I made over 3000% in profit in a few weeks. Fact is, the traditional financial system, the traditional money system makes you poor, not rich. If you want to earn $500,000, $1 million, you have to wait until you're 50, 60, 70 in the traditional financial system, and you probably will still be broke. and you will be old. This is not a sexy combination, as you can imagine. But the question is, how can you start in crypto and make these profits? Where to invest? Where to start? My name is Gunnar and I'm from Germany, as you can hear, and things are a little bit different in Germany. More about that later on. The fact is, there are lots of different cryptocurrencies. It's a gigantic universe where beginners and professionals get easily lost. But there is light at the end of the tunnel. There are 7 key steps you need to follow to become successful in this market. You have to know them, and if you fail one of them, it's literally impossible to succeed in this market. Just an example, one of the key points is your exchange, and one of the biggest are, for example, Binance and Coinbase. These are trusted and well-established exchanges, but, and this is a big but, you won't find the super profitable coins on those exchanges. The unknown super profitable coins that get gigantic profits are not traded on those kind of exchanges. They are traded on much smaller insider platforms that are barely known. And I can tell you what those super secret exchanges are and why they are so profitable. And another super important thing are the right information sources. The point is, the internet is gigantic. There are hundreds and hundreds of YouTube channels, blogs, pages, and much more. And there are also market makers and influencers. For example, Elon Musk, he is not a crypto guy, but the moment he recommended Dogecoin, it went through the roof, to the moon, so to say. But why did he recommend it? Where did he hear it from? He didn't hear it from newspapers. And believe me, he is listening to someone. But you have to know who, and you have to react before he is reacting. This is really, really important. And these are only 2 of the 7 steps you have to follow in order to be successful in crypto. And if you want to know all of these steps in much more detail, and if you want to have a comprehensive checklist, here's what you should do. There is a link below this video. Click on this link and you will get the opportunity to subscribe to my channel. Click on the link and you will see a video where I explain the next steps. So see you soon. Click on the link now. I'll see you there.